In the glittering ballroom of Ashford Hall, a masquerade hides deadly secrets. When Clara Ashford, radiant in her Fairy Queen's gown, is stabbed with an ornate dagger, the music stops and suspicion falls on 4 masked figures. The grieving host, a seductive dancer, a brooding musician, and a jealous rival. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of love, pride, and betrayal, revealing a killer whose mask hides a heart consumed by rage. In a night of costumes, only truth will unmask the murderer. Chapter 1. The Invitation. In the drowsy calm of St. Mary Mead, where the hedgerows bloomed with late autumn roses and the church clock ticked with unhurried precision, Miss Jane Marple sat in her modest drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking softly. The afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where a single letter lay, its cream envelope bearing the embossed crest of Ashford Hall. Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp despite her years, studied the envelope with a curiosity that belied her serene expression. She adjusted her spectacles and slit it open with a silver letter opener, revealing an invitation penned in Sir Henry Ashford's meticulous hand. The card announced a costume ball, to be held at Ashford Hall on the eve of All Hallows, in celebration of the engagement of Sir Henry's niece, Clara Ashford, to Captain Lionel Drake, late of His Majesty's Navy. "A costume ball," Miss Marple murmured, her needles pausing. "How very theatrical!" She knew such events, with their masks and pretense, often stirred passions better left dormant. In her experience, people wore disguises even without costumes, and a grand gathering like this was bound to unveil secrets. Miss Marple had no great fondness for balls. She preferred the quiet rhythms of village life. But Sir Henry's invitations were rare, and Ashford Hall, a Georgian pile some 5 miles from St. Mary Mead, was a place of intrigue. She recalled Sir Henry, a widower of 50, whose charm masked a cautious nature. His niece Clara, a spirited girl of 23, had been the talk of the county since her return from London, her beauty drawing suitors like moths to a flame. Captain Drake, though less known, was said to be dashing, if somewhat reckless. Miss Marple's lips twitched. "A naval man," she mused. "They often carry storms in their wake." She rose, her movements spry, and crossed to her wardrobe, selecting a gown of soft grey muslin in the Regency style, simple yet elegant, with a lace cap to frame her silver hair. It was a costume, she thought, that would allow her to blend into the shadows, where observation was easiest. As she folded the invitation, her mind turned to the guest list. Sir Henry's circle was eclectic. Artists, aristocrats, perhaps a few with less savoury reputations. She had heard whispers of a French dancer, Madame Celeste, whose performances were as captivating as they were scandalous, and a musician, Victor Lang, whose melancholy violin had stirred even the stolid hearts of St. Mary Mead. Then there was Lord Reginald Vance, a name mentioned in hushed tones at the village tea-shop, his pursuit of Clara no secret. Miss Marple glanced out her window, where the postman's bicycle gleamed in the fading light. She knew human nature too well to dismiss the invitation as mere festivity. "A ball," she said softly, "is never just a ball." With a final click of her needles, she resolved to attend not for merriment, but to watch, to listen, and to see what truths might slip through the cracks of Ashford Hall's glittering facade. Chapter 2. The Grand Hall. The carriage wheels crunched on the gravel drive of Ashford Hall. as Miss Jane Marple descended, her grey muslin gown whispering against the crisp October air. The great house loomed before her, its Palladian facade aglow with torchlight, the windows spilling golden warmth into the night. A harvest moon hung low, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, and the distant hoot of an owl lent an eerie note to the festive clamour within. Miss Marple adjusted her lace cap, her keen eyes scanning the arriving guests, figures cloaked in velvet capes, their faces hidden behind masks of silk and feathers. She felt the weight of anticipation, not unlike the hush before a storm, and stepped into the hall with the quiet resolve of one accustomed to seeing beyond the surface. The entrance hall was a spectacle of grandeur, its marble floor gleaming under a chandelier that sparkled like a constellation. Footmen in powdered wigs moved deftly among the crowd, offering crystal flutes of champagne. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax candles, rosewater, and the faint musk of anticipation. Guests swirled in a kaleidoscope of costumes, a cavalier in scarlet satin, a shepherdess with a gilded crook, a turbaned sultan whose jewels caught the light. Miss Marple, unobtrusive in her Regency simplicity, found a velvet-upholstered chair near a potted palm, and settled to observe, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression one of mild curiosity. At the centre of the ballroom, Sir Henry Ashford held court, his Venetian doge's robe resplendent with gold embroidery, his mask a gilded half-moon that revealed only his sharp blue eyes. He greeted each guest with a practised smile, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man accustomed to command. "Welcome, welcome," he boomed, clasping the hand of a portly gentleman dressed as Henry VIII. Miss Marple noted the slight tension in Sir Henry's posture, the way his gaze darted toward the grand staircase, where his niece, Clara Ashford, was about to make her entrance. Clara descended like a vision, her fairy queen's gown a confection of silver gauze and emerald ribbons, a delicate crown of crystal leaves glinting atop her auburn curls. Her mask, green and gold, lent her an ethereal air, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the faint tremor in her fingers as she took the arm of Captain Lionel Drake. The captain, dashing in a cavalier's plumed hat and sapphire doublet, cut a striking figure. Though his smile seemed forced, his hand straying to a silver flask at his hip. Miss Marple's lips pursed. A man who drinks at such an hour, she thought, often has something to hide. The orchestra, tucked in an alcove, struck up a lively gavotte, and the floor filled with dancers. Miss Marple's gaze roamed, cataloguing the figures who stood out in the throng. There was Madame Celeste, the French dancer, her peacock-feathered mask a vivid splash of turquoise and gold, her movements lithe as she glided through the crowd. Her scarlet gown clung to her form, and her laughter rang like a bell, drawing admiring glances. Yet Miss Marple noted the calculated precision in her steps, as if every gesture were a performance. "A woman who knows her power," she murmured, her fingers tightening briefly on her reticule. Nearby, Victor Lang, the violinist, stood apart, his lean frame draped in a black domino cloak, his mask a stark white oval that gave him the look of a spectre. His dark eyes, visible through the slits, were fixed on the dancers, but Miss Marple sensed a restlessness in him, a coiled energy that belied his stillness. His violin case rested at his feet, its leather worn but polished, and she wondered what else it might contain besides strings and rosin. Music, she knew, could mask a multitude of sins. Then there was Lord Reginald Vance, unmistakable even in his highwayman's disguise. A black tricorn hat, a crimson-lined cape, and a mask that covered only his eyes, leaving his sharp jaw and sardonic smile exposed. He moved with the confidence of a man born to privilege, bowing to ladies with exaggerated gallantry, but his gaze lingered on Clara, who danced with Captain Drake. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Lord Reginald's pursuit of Clara was no secret in St. Mary Mead. The village gossips had spun tales of his ardent proposals, each refused. There was a hunger in his stare, a possessiveness that set Miss Marple's instincts humming. The ballroom itself was a marvel, its walls hung with tapestries depicting pastoral scenes, its ceiling frescoed with cherubs and clouds. Tall mirrors reflected the dancers, doubling the spectacle, while candelabra cast flickering shadows that seemed to dance in time with the music. Miss Marple sipped a glass of lemonade, its tartness grounding her amid the opulence. She noted the servants' discreet movements, the way they avoided meeting guests' eyes, and the occasional glance exchanged between them. Servants, she knew, saw everything, and she made a mental note to speak with the housekeeper later. As the gavotte gave way to a waltz, Clara and Captain Drake took the floor, their steps graceful but stiff, as if each were conscious of being watched. Miss Marple observed the captain's hand, which rested lightly on Clara's waist but twitched as if longing to return to his flask. Clara's smile, too, was brittle, her eyes darting toward the crowd. Was she searching for someone, or avoiding them? Miss Marple's gaze followed hers, landing on Lord Reginald, who stood by a pillar, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable behind his mask. Madame Celeste, meanwhile, had drawn a small crowd, her laughter rising above the music as she recounted a tale of Parisian salons to a group of enthralled gentlemen. Miss Marple watched her closely, noting the way her eyes flicked toward Captain Drake, a fleeting intensity that vanished as quickly as it appeared. A rival, perhaps, or something more complicated. Miss Marple filed the observation away, her mind a ledger of human motives. Victor Lang, too, drew her attention. He had moved to the edge of the orchestra, his fingers brushing the strings of an imaginary violin as he watched the dancers. His solitude was striking in the midst of the revelry, and Miss Marple wondered what thoughts lay behind his pale mask. She recalled a village rumour that Clara had once attended one of his recitals, lingering afterward to praise his music. Had there been more to their acquaintance? Music, she reflected, could forge bonds as strong as love, or as dangerous. The hour grew late, and the air grew warmer, heavy with the scent of perfume and wax. Miss Marple rose, her small frame moving unnoticed through the crowd, her ears attuned to snatches of conversation. A dowager in a powdered wig complained of the heat. A young man in a jester's costume laughed too loudly at his own jest. Over by the refreshment table, Sir Henry spoke in low tones to a man dressed as a Roman senator. Their heads bent close. Miss Marple caught the words investment and risk, but the music drowned out the rest. Sir Henry's financial troubles, whispered about in St. Mary Mead, seemed to follow him even here. She paused by a window, the cool glass a relief against her fingertips. Outside, the gardens were a maze of shadows, the moonlight silvering the topiary. A figure moved swiftly across the lawn, a guest, perhaps, seeking air, or something less innocent. Miss Marple's eyes lingered, but the figure vanished into the darkness. She turned back to the ballroom, where the waltz had ended, and Clara stood alone for a moment, her mask lifted slightly as she fanned herself. Captain Drake was nowhere in sight, and Miss Marple noted Lord Reginald's approach, his stride purposeful. Their conversation was brief, Clara's posture stiffening as Lord Reginald leaned close, his hand gesturing emphatically. Miss Marple could not hear their words, but Clara's quick step away and the flush on her cheeks spoke volumes. Lord Reginald watched her go, his fists clenching, then turned abruptly and disappeared into the crowd. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. Jealousy, she knew, was a fire that burned hot and left ashes. The orchestra announced a special performance, and the crowd parted to reveal Madame Celeste, who took the centre of the floor. Her peacock mask gleamed as she began a solo dance, her movements a blend of grace and daring, her scarlet gown swirling like flame. The guests were spellbound, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. Captain Drake had reappeared, his face flushed, his flask now openly in hand. He stood by the orchestra, his eyes not on Madame Celeste, but on Clara, who had rejoined the crowd, her mask firmly in place. Victor Lang, too, watched the dance, his expression unreadable. Miss Marple noted the way his hand rested on his violin case, as if it were an extension of himself. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, belonging to a cellist who had hidden a stolen brooch inside. What, she wondered, might Victor Lang conceal? As Madame Celeste's dance ended to thunderous applause, Sir Henry raised a glass, proposing a toast to Clara and Captain Drake. The guests echoed his words, but Miss Marple sensed a discord beneath the cheers. Clara's smile was strained. Captain Drake's grip on his flask tightened, and Lord Reginald, now at the edge of the room, turned away, his cape swirling. Even Madame Celeste, bowing to the crowd, seemed to cast a glance toward the engaged couple, her lips curving in a way that was not entirely kind. Miss Marple returned to her chair, her mind a tapestry of impressions. The grandeur of Ashford Hall, the glitter of costumes, the music that swelled and faded, all were a stage, and the players upon it were hiding truths. She thought of her garden at home, how weeds lurked beneath the roses, invisible until one looked closely. Here, too, she sensed roots of discontent, of envy, of desire. Her eyes rested on Clara, radiant yet vulnerable, and she felt a pang of unease. "A costume ball," she murmured, "is a dangerous place for secrets." The clock struck 11, its chimes swallowed by the music. Miss Marple sipped her lemonade, her gaze steady, her thoughts weaving a pattern only she could see. The night was young, and the drama, she knew, had only begun. Chapter 3. The Dance. The ballroom of Ashford Hall pulsed with the rhythm of a Viennese waltz, the orchestra's strings weaving a spell that drew couples to the polished oak floor. Miss Jane Marple, seated near a gilded mirror that reflected the whirl of silks and satins, watched the dancers with the quiet intensity of a botanist studying rare blooms. Her grey muslin gown blended into the shadows, and her lace cap tilted slightly as she leaned forward, her eyes missing nothing. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of jasmine perfume and melting candle wax, and the chandeliers above cast a kaleidoscope of light that danced across masked faces. At the heart of the floor, Clara Ashford moved with Captain Lionel Drake, her Fairy Queen's gown shimmering like moonlight on water. Her steps were graceful, but Miss Marple noted a certain stiffness, as if Clara were counting beats rather than losing herself in the music. Captain Drake, resplendent in his cavalier's doublet, led with confidence, yet his smile was a touch too tight. his left hand brushing the silver flask at his hip more often than the dance required. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on that flask, its gleam catching the light. A man who clings to spirits, she thought, is often drowning something else. Across the room, Madame Celeste commanded attention, her peacock-feathered mask a vivid contrast to the scarlet silk that clung to her form. She danced with a portly gentleman dressed as a Tudor king, her movements fluid yet deliberate, each step a performance that drew gasps from onlookers. Miss Marple observed the way Madame Celeste's eyes, bright behind her mask, darted toward Captain Drake, a flicker of something, curiosity perhaps or calculation, passing across her face. The dancer's hands, gloved in black lace, were strong, not delicate, and Miss Marple wondered what else they might be capable of wielding. Victor Lang, the violinist, stood near the orchestra, his black domino cloak making him a shadow among the vibrant costumes. He did not dance, his pale mask turned toward the floor, his fingers twitching as if longing for his violin. Miss Marple noted his solitude, the way he seemed both part of the scene and apart from it. She recalled a conversation overheard in St. Mary Mead, where the butcher's wife had mentioned Victor's late-night walks, his violin case always at his side. "A man who carries his work everywhere," she murmured, "may carry other burdens too." Lord Reginald Vance, in his highwayman's guise, had not yet taken to the dance. He leaned against a marble pillar, his crimson-lined cape thrown back, his mask doing little to conceal the intensity of his gaze. It followed Clara, unyielding, as she spun in Captain Drake's arms. Miss Marple's lips pursed. She knew the look of a man whose heart had been refused, and Lord Reginald's was not the resigned sorrow of unrequited love, but something sharper, more dangerous. His hand rested on the hilt of a decorative sword at his belt, and Miss Marple wondered if it was merely ornamental. Sir Henry Ashford, resplendent as a Venetian doge, circulated among his guests, his laughter hearty, but his eyes watchful. He paused to exchange words with a dowager in a powdered wig, then moved to a group of young men in military costumes, his gestures expansive yet controlled. Miss Marple caught a fragment of his conversation, a mention of Clara's happiness, and noted the way his voice faltered, as if the words carried a weight he could not share. She thought of Sir Henry's study, the locked drawer she had glimpsed earlier, and wondered what secrets it held. The waltz ended, and the dancers paused, catching their breath, as the orchestra prepared for the next piece. Clara slipped from Captain Drake's arm, fanning herself with a delicate silk fan, her mask lifted just enough to reveal flushed cheeks. Captain Drake, meanwhile, stepped toward the refreshment table, his flask now openly in hand, as he poured a measure into a glass of punch. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A man who drinks so boldly, she thought, is either careless or desperate. Madame Celeste, free of her partner, approached the orchestra, her laughter ringing as she spoke to the conductor. Miss Marple watched her closely, noting the way her gloved hand brushed Victor Lang's arm, a gesture too fleeting to be accidental. Victor's mask hid his expression, but his posture stiffened, and he stepped back, his hand tightening on his violin case. Miss Marple's mind turned to the village gossip about Madame Celeste, her Parisian scandals, her rumoured liaisons. A woman like that, she reflected, could stir trouble as easily as she stirred admiration. The orchestra announced a special performance, and the crowd parted, forming a circle around the dance floor. Madame Celeste stepped forward, her scarlet gown aflame against the polished wood. The music began, a haunting melody that seemed to rise from the strings alone, and she danced, her movements a blend of elegance and ferocity. Her peacock mask gleamed, and her arms arced through the air like wings, drawing murmurs of awe. Yet Miss Marple's attention was drawn to the edges of the circle, where Clara stood, her fan stilled, her eyes fixed on the dancer. Was it admiration or something else? Miss Marple could not be sure, but she noted Captain Drake's absence from Clara's side, and Lord Reginald's sudden movement toward her. Lord Reginald whispered something to Clara, his hand grazing her arm. She recoiled, her fan snapping shut, and turned away, rejoining the crowd. Lord Reginald's jaw tightened, and he retreated to the shadows, his cape swirling. Miss Marple's fingers, idle in her lap, twitched as if knitting an invisible thread. Jealousy, she knew, was a spark that could ignite in an instant. The music swelled, and Madame Celeste's dance reached its climax, her final pose a tableau of defiance, one arm extended as if casting a spell. The applause was deafening, but Miss Marple's eyes were elsewhere. Captain Drake had returned, his face flushed, his flask tucked away but his gait unsteady. He approached Clara, who smiled but did not meet his eyes. Victor Lang, meanwhile, had slipped closer to the orchestra, his mask turned toward Madame Celeste, though his expression remained hidden. Sir Henry raised a glass, his voice cutting through the chatter. "To Clara and Captain Drake," he called, his tone warm but strained. The guests echoed the toast, their glasses glinting, but Miss Marple sensed a dissonance, like a false note in the music. Clara's smile was a mask in itself, Captain Drake's bow stiff, and Lord Reginald, now at the back of the room, did not raise his glass. Madame Celeste, sipping champagne, watched the couple with a smile that held no warmth, and Victor Lang's hand lingered on his violin case, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm. Miss Marple leaned back, her lemonade untouched, her mind a web of observations. The dance had revealed more than steps. It had shown tensions, rivalries, glances that spoke louder than words. She thought of her niece's garden in St. Mary Mead, where a single weed could choke a rose if left unchecked. Here, in the grandeur of Ashford Hall, she sensed such weeds, hidden beneath the glitter of costumes and the lilt of music. Her eyes rested on Clara, radiant yet fragile, and a chill touched her heart. The night, she knew, was far from over. Suddenly, a scream shattered the music, high and piercing, like glass breaking. The dancers froze, the orchestra faltered, and Miss Marple's head turned sharply. Clara stumbled forward, her Fairy Queen's gown stained with a spreading crimson, her mask slipping to reveal wide, unseeing eyes. She collapsed, a dagger protruding from her back, its ornate handle catching the chandelier's light. Sir Henry rushed to her side, his face ashen, his voice a broken cry. "Clara! No!" The ballroom erupted into chaos, gasps, shouts, the clatter of dropped glasses. Miss Marple rose, her small frame steady amid the panic, her eyes scanning the crowd. Lord Reginald stood rigid, his hand on his sword. Captain Drake swayed, his flask forgotten. Madame Celeste's mask hid her expression, but her hands were clenched. Victor Lang gripped his violin case, his knuckles white. Sir Henry's voice rose above the din. "Lock the doors! No one leaves!" Miss Marple's gaze returned to Clara, the dagger a stark intrusion in the fairy tale gown. She noted its position, the angle of the blade, the absence of Clara's mask on the floor. "A costume ball," she whispered, is a dangerous place for truth. Her mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of the night, as the great hall of Ashford Hall became a stage for tragedy. Chapter 4. The Locked Room. The chaos in Ashford Hall's ballroom subsided into a tense hush, as Sir Henry's command to lock the doors echoed through the vast space. Footmen moved swiftly, their faces pale, securing the heavy oak panels with a finality that seemed to seal the guests' fates as much as the room itself. Miss Jane Marple stood quietly near the edge of the crowd, her grey muslin gown blending with the shadows cast by the flickering candelabra. Her sharp eyes, undimmed by the panic around her, took in the scene. Clara Ashford's body had been gently carried to the library, a room adjacent to the ballroom, and the guests, still in their costumes, whispered in knots, their masks now seeming more sinister than festive. Miss Marple slipped through the throng, unnoticed as always, and entered the library, where the air was cooler, scented with old leather and polished wood. The room was a haven of quiet, its walls lined with books bound in crimson and gold, a fire crackling in the grate. Clara lay on a chaise longue, covered with a velvet throw, the dagger now removed and placed on a mahogany table, its blade glinting cruelly in the firelight. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on it. An ornate piece, its handle carved with intricate vines, too distinctive to be commonplace. She noted the absence of fingerprints, the metal polished to a mirror sheen, as if the killer had taken care to leave no trace. Inspector Craddock arrived, his overcoat damp from the night air, his face set in a familiar blend of determination and exasperation. He spotted Miss Marple at once, his lips twitching in a wry smile. "I might have known you'd be here, Miss Marple," he said, brushing a hand through his greying hair. "Already poking about, I suppose?" She returned his smile, her expression mild. "Merely observing, Inspector." "For instance, that dagger. It's rather unusual, don't you think? And Clara's mask is nowhere to be seen." Craddock's eyes narrowed, and he glanced at the table, then at the chaise. "No mask," he muttered, making a note. "You're right." "That's odd." He turned to the constable guarding the door. "Ensure no one touches anything." Then, to Miss Marple, he added, "You've a knack for spotting what we miss, but don't go solving this before I've had a chance, eh?" Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her reticule, clicked softly as she settled into a high-backed chair. "I wouldn't dream of it, Inspector," she said, though her eyes sparkled with a quiet certainty. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a missing button or a misplaced letter could unravel a village scandal. Here, in the opulence of Ashford Hall, the stakes were higher, but human nature, she knew, remained the same. The library door opened, admitting Sir Henry, his Venetian doge's robe now dishevelled, his mask discarded to reveal a face drawn with grief. "Inspector," he said, his voice hoarse, "this is a nightmare." Clara, she was the light of this house. He sank into a chair, his hands trembling. Craddock nodded, his notebook open. "We'll need to question everyone, Sir Henry. No one leaves until we've established the facts. Can you tell me who was near Clara when it happened?" Sir Henry shook his head, his eyes distant. "It was chaos, a blur of costumes, masks. I was by the refreshment table, speaking with Colonel Bantry. Then the scream." He trailed off, his fingers twisting his signet ring. Miss Marple's needles paused. "And before the scream, Sir Henry," she asked gently, "did you notice Clara with anyone in particular?" He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the fire. "She was dancing with Captain Drake, then?" I believe Lord Reginald spoke to her briefly. But it was a fleeting thing, nothing more. Miss Marple noted the hesitation, the way Sir Henry's hand tightened on his ring. She recalled the locked drawer in his study, glimpsed earlier, and wondered what it concealed. A man of Sir Henry's position, she thought, might guard secrets as carefully as his reputation. Craddock turned to the dagger, examining it without touching. "This isn't a common blade," he said. "Looks foreign, perhaps Italian. Any idea where it came from, Sir Henry?" Sir Henry frowned, leaning closer. "I've never seen it before." "It's not from the Hall's collection. We have swords, yes, but nothing like this." His voice held a note of unease, and Miss Marple wondered if he was entirely truthful. Collections, she knew, could hide more than heirlooms. The library door opened again, and a maid entered, her face pale beneath her cap. "Begging your pardon, sir," she said to Sir Henry, "but the guests are restless." "Some are demanding to leave. Tell them to wait," Craddock said firmly, "and send in Captain Drake first." As the maid hurried out, Miss Marple's gaze returned to the dagger. Its placement in Clara's back suggested a close, sudden strike. Someone she trusted, or someone who had blended seamlessly into the crowd. She thought of the costumes, Lord Reginald's sword, Madame Celeste's flowing sleeves, Victor Lang's heavy violin case. Any could conceal a weapon, and the masks had ensured anonymity. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Fate, where a stolen brooch had been hidden in a flower basket. Here, the possibilities were endless. Captain Drake entered, his cavalier's doublet unbuttoned, his face flushed. His flask was gone, but his breath carried the sharp tang of whiskey. "This is a damn tragedy," he said, his voice rough. "Clara, I was meant to protect her." Craddock's pen scratched across his notebook. "Where were you when she was attacked, Captain?" Drake hesitated, his eyes darting to Miss Marple, then back to Craddock. "I'd stepped away, needed air. I was near the terrace doors, I think. The music was loud, and then I heard the scream." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "You were fond of Clara, Captain?" she asked, her tone soft but probing. Drake's jaw tightened. "More than fond. I loved her. We were to be married." His voice broke, but Miss Marple noted the way his hands clenched, as if holding back more than grief. Craddock pressed further. "Did you see anyone near her? Lord Reginald, perhaps? Or the dancer, Madame Celeste?" Drake shook his head. "I wasn't watching. I should have been, but—" He trailed off, his gaze fixed on the dagger. "That's not mine," he added quickly, though no one had asked. Miss Marple's eyes followed his to the blade. A man so quick to deny, she thought, often knows more than he says. She recalled Captain Drake's flask, his unsteady gait during the dance. Guilt, perhaps? Or something darker? As Craddock dismissed Drake, Miss Marple rose, her small frame moving to the table where the dagger lay. She studied it closely, noting the absence of blood on the handle, the precision of its design. "A collector's piece," she murmured. "Not meant for use, but for display, until tonight." Craddock glanced at her. "You think the killer brought it deliberately?" "I think," she said, her voice mild, "that nothing in this room is here by chance." "Including Clara's missing mask." The inspector nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We'll search the ballroom. If that mask is hidden, it might tell us something." Miss Marple returned to her chair, her mind turning over the fragments of the evening. Lord Reginald's possessive gaze, Madame Celeste's calculated glances, Victor Lang's heavy case, Captain Drake's flask, Sir Henry's locked drawer. Each was a thread in a tapestry she could not yet see. But she knew, as surely as she knew the roses in her garden, that the truth lay in the details. The locked room held secrets, and she would unravel them, one stitch at a time. Chapter 5. The Host's Burden. The library of Ashford Hall, with its heavy scent of aged leather and smouldering embers, seemed to close in around Miss Jane Marple as she sat, her knitting needles moving with a rhythmic precision that belied the whirl of her thoughts. The firelight cast long shadows across the book-lined walls, and the ornate dagger, now covered with a cloth at Inspector Craddock's order, lay like a silent accusation on the mahogany table. Clara Ashford's body, draped in velvet, rested on the chaise longue, a stark reminder of the night's tragedy. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, drifted to Sir Henry Ashford, who stood before a tall window, his Venetian doge's robe crumpled, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Inspector Craddock had requested a private word with Sir Henry, and the room had been cleared of all but Miss Marple, whose unobtrusive presence was as easily overlooked as a shadow. She had settled into a wing-back chair, her grey muslin gown blending with the dimness, her lace cap tilted as she listened. Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his voice steady but firm. "Sir Henry," he began, "we need to understand Clara's last moments. You were her guardian. Did she confide in you about any troubles?" Sir Henry turned, his face haggard, the lines around his eyes deepened by grief. "Clara was a bright spirit," he said, his voice low. "She came to me after her parents died, and I raised her as my own." "She had no enemies, Inspector. None that I knew." His fingers twisted the heavy signet ring on his left hand, a gesture Miss Marple noted with interest. It was a habit she recalled from a saint, Mary Mead Squire, who fidgeted when hiding a debt. Secrets, she thought, often showed in the smallest movements. Craddock's pen scratched across the page. "No enemies, you say? But what of suitors? Lord Reginald Vance, for instance. He pursued her, didn't he?" Sir Henry stiffened, his gaze flickering to the fire. "Reginald was persistent, yes. He proposed several times, but Clara refused him. She loved Captain Drake. Reginald is a gentleman, Inspector. Hot-headed, perhaps, but not a murderer." His voice carried conviction, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, a shadow that Miss Marple caught like a moth in a web. "And Captain Drake," Craddock pressed, "was their engagement smooth? No quarrels, no rivalries?" Sir Henry hesitated, his hand pausing on the ring. "They were happy," he said, but the words lacked warmth. "Lionel is a naval man, brave, decorated, but—" He stopped as if catching himself, then added, "Clara was content." "That's all that matters," Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Content, Sir Henry?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. "Young women in love are often more than content." Did Clara seem herself these past weeks? Sir Henry's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw a flash of something, fear, perhaps, or guilt. "She was preoccupied," he admitted. "She spoke of the future, of leaving Ashford Hall." "I thought it was nerves, the engagement, the ball." He turned back to the window, his shoulders sagging. "I should have listened more closely." Miss Marple's mind turned to the locked drawer in Sir Henry's study, glimpsed during her earlier visit to the hall. She recalled a St. Mary Mead widow who kept her late husband's letters in a locked box, guarding a scandal that never saw light. "Did Clara leave any papers, Sir Henry?" she asked. "Letters, perhaps, or a diary?" He started, his hand tightening on the ring. "A diary. I don't know. She was private, kept her own counsel. His voice was too quick, and Miss Marple's needles paused, marking the moment. Craddock, sensing the shift, changed tack. "The dagger, Sir Henry. You said it's not from your collection. Could it belong to a guest? Someone brought it here tonight." Sir Henry shook his head, his expression troubled. "I've no idea. We have swords, daggers, yes, but they're displayed in the armoury, locked away. This one." He gestured toward the covered blade. "It's foreign, ornate. I'd remember it." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the table. The dagger's vine-carved handle suggested a craftsman's care, not a weapon meant for violence. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead, antiques dealer, who had once sold a decorative knife, only to learn it had been used in a theft. Objects, she knew, could carry motives as surely as people. Craddock closed his notebook with a snap. "We'll need to search the hall, Sir Henry." The mask, the dagger. Someone here knows more than they're saying. Sir Henry nodded, his face weary. "Do what you must, Inspector." "I want justice for Clara." He moved to the door, then paused, glancing back at Miss Marple. "You'll stay, Miss Marple. You have a way of seeing things." She smiled faintly, her needles resuming their rhythm. "I'll stay, Sir Henry. There's much to see yet." As he left, Craddock turned to her, his voice low. "He's holding something back, isn't he?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "People often do, Inspector. It's a matter of finding the right thread to pull." She rose, her small frame moving to the window where Sir Henry had stood. The gardens beyond were dark, the moonlight silvering the hedges, but she saw no movement now, only stillness. Her mind returned to the ballroom, to the costumes that could hide a blade. Lord Reginald's sword, Madame Celeste's voluminous sleeves, Victor Lang's violin case, Captain Drake's flask, and Sir Henry's ring, twisted like a confession he could not voice. She thought of Clara, her Fairy Queen's gown, now a shroud, her mask missing. The mask, she sensed, was key, not just a disguise, but a clue to the moment of the crime. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Bazaar, where a stolen scarf had been found in a flower pot, hidden in haste. Here the mask might be tucked away, waiting to betray its keeper. Craddock joined her at the window, his expression grim. "We'll question the others. Drake, Vance, the dancer, the musician. Someone saw something." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "Someone always does, Inspector. The trick is knowing who." As they returned to the ballroom, where the guests waited in uneasy clusters, Miss Marple's mind was already weaving a pattern. Sir Henry's burden, she knew, was not just grief. There was something locked away, perhaps in that drawer, perhaps in his heart, that held the key to Clara's death. She would watch and listen and wait for the truth to slip through the cracks of Ashford Hall's grandeur. Chapter 6. The Dancer's Secret. The conservatory of Ashford Hall, a glass-walled haven filled with the heavy scent of orchids and damp earth, offered a stark contrast to the sombre library where Clara Ashford's body lay. Miss Jane Marple stepped carefully over the tiled floor, her grey muslin gown brushing against a fern, as she followed Inspector Craddock to where Madame Celeste awaited questioning. The dancer stood by a wrought-iron bench, her peacock-feathered mask now resting on a table, revealing a face of striking beauty. High cheekbones, eyes like dark jade, and lips that curved with a hint of defiance. Her scarlet gown, though still elegant, seemed out of place amid the greenery, as if she were a flame flickering in a rainstorm. Inspector Craddock, his notebook open, wasted no time. "Madame Celeste," he began, his voice clipped, "you were performing when Miss Ashford was attacked. Did you see anything unusual before or after your dance?" Madame Celeste's laugh was sharp, like the snap of a fan. "Monsieur Inspector, I dance. My eyes are on my steps, not on the crowd. I saw nothing." Her French accent was pronounced, but Miss Marple noted a careful precision in her words, as if each were chosen to deflect rather than reveal. Miss Marple, seated on a high-foot cushioned chair, her knitting needles clicking softly, studied the dancer. Madame Celeste's hands, though gloved in black lace, were strong, the fingers calloused in a way that suggested more than delicate pirouettes. "You knew Clara well, madame?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild, her eyes gentle but unyielding. The dancer's gaze flickered, a shadow crossing her face. "We spoke sometimes," she said, adjusting a fold of her gown. "Clara was curious about my travels, my performances in Paris. She was kind but troubled." Her voice softened on the last word, and Miss Marple wondered if it was genuine or another performance. Craddock raised an eyebrow. "Troubled? In what way?" Madame Celeste shrugged, a gesture too casual for the moment. She was young, in love, yet not at ease. "She asked me once about freedom, about leaving everything behind. I told her freedom has a price." Her lips curved, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Miss Marple's needles paused. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead seamstress, who had fled a cruel husband, her hands calloused from years of toil. Madame Celeste's hands, she noted, bore no rings, no adornments, only the marks of hard use. "You danced beautifully tonight," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "Clara must have admired you greatly." "Did she ever visit you alone?" Madame Celeste's posture stiffened, her fingers tightening on the bench. "Once or twice," she admitted. "She came to my lodgings in the village, asking about Paris, about my life." She was restless. The dancer's eyes darted to Craddock, then back to Miss Marple, as if weighing how much to say. Craddock jotted a note. "And Captain Drake? Did you know him well?" The question hung in the air, and Miss Marple caught the briefest tightening of Madame Celeste's lips. "I met him through Clara," she said coolly. "He is charming, as naval men often are. But I am a dancer, not a debutante. My interest lies in my art." Her tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple recalled the glance Madame Celeste had cast toward Captain Drake during her performance, a look that held more than professional curiosity. "And Lord Reginald Vance," Craddock pressed. "Did you see him near Clara tonight?" Madame Celeste's laugh returned, sharp and bright. "Lord Reginald? He is all eyes for Clara, always. I saw him watching her as he always does, but nothing more." She waved a hand as if brushing away the question. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. She thought of the dancer's performance, how her eyes had lingered on Captain Drake, how her movements had seemed to speak to him alone. A woman scorned, she reflected, could hide her wounds behind a smile. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead actress who had charmed the village while nursing a broken heart. Madame Celeste, she suspected, was no stranger to such masks. Craddock closed his notebook with a snap. "We'll need you to remain at the hall, madame. If you remember anything at all, come to me." The dancer inclined her head, her expression unreadable. "Of course, Inspector. I am at your service." She glided toward the door, her scarlet gown trailing like a comet's tail, but Miss Marple noted the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand lingered on the doorframe as if reluctant to leave. As the door closed, Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "She's hiding something, isn't she?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "People often hide what they fear to reveal, Inspector." "Madame Celeste is a performer, and performers know how to choose their audience." She rose, her small frame moving to the table where the peacock mask lay. Its feathers shimmered, but one was bent, as if caught in haste. Miss Marple's mind turned to the ballroom, to the moment of Clara's scream. Madame Celeste had been dancing, yes, but her position had given her a view of the crowd. Had she seen more than she claimed? And her hands, those calloused fingers, could they have wielded a dagger? Miss Marple thought of Clara's visits to the dancers' lodgings, her questions about freedom. A young woman restless in love, confiding in a stranger, might reveal secrets better kept. She recalled Sir Henry's locked drawer, Captain Drake's flask, Lord Reginald's possessive gaze, Victor Lang's heavy violin case. Each was a piece in a puzzle, and Madame Celeste, with her sharp eyes and guarded words, was another. As they left the conservatory, the night air cool against her face, Miss Marple's mind was a tapestry of threads, each leading to a truth she could not yet see. The dancer's secret, she knew, was a knot she must untangle, and she would do so with the patience of one who knew that even the smallest stitch could unravel a mystery. Chapter 7. The Musician's Silence. The drawing-room of Ashford Hall, with its damask curtains and rosewood furniture, held a sombre air as Miss Jane Marple entered, her grey muslin gown whispering against the polished floor. The room was lit by a single candelabrum, its flames casting wavering shadows on the walls, where portraits of Ashford ancestors gazed down with stern disapproval. Inspector Craddock stood by a marquetry table, his notebook open, his expression one of quiet determination. Victor Lang, the violinist, waited near a window, his black domino cloak discarded to reveal a plain suit, his white mask now a stark contrast to his gaunt, hollow-eyed face. His violin case rested at his feet, its leather scuffed but gleaming, as if it were a talisman he could not bear to part with. Miss Marple settled into a cushioned chair, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. She studied Victor, noting the way his fingers twitched, as if longing to trace the strings of his absent instrument. His solitude in the ballroom had intrigued her, a man apart, yet tethered to the music that filled the night. Now, in the drawing-room stillness, he seemed even more isolated, his silence a wall she intended to breach. Craddock cleared his throat, his voice firm but not unkind. "Mr. Lang, you were with the orchestra when Miss Ashford was attacked. Did you see anything unusual? Anyone near her, perhaps, or a movement in the crowd?" Victor's dark eyes, visible through the slits of his mask, met Craddock's briefly before dropping to the floor. "I played all evening," he said, his voice low, almost a monotone. "My focus was on the music." "I saw nothing." His words were clipped, as if each cost him effort, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his hands, now clasped tightly before him. She tilted her head, her voice gentle as a summer breeze. "You played beautifully, Mr. Lang. Clara must have admired your music. Did she ever speak to you about it?" Victor flinched, a movement so slight it might have gone unnoticed, but Miss Marple's eyes missed nothing. "She came to a recital once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She said my music moved her. That was all." His gaze darted to his violin case, and Miss Marple wondered what weight it carried beyond its strings. Craddock pressed further, his pen poised. And tonight? You were near the orchestra, with a clear view of the dance floor. Did you notice Lord Reginald Vance, or perhaps Madame Celeste, near Clara? Victor shook his head, his mask giving him the look of a ghost. The ballroom was a blur, masks, costumes, lights. I saw only my bow, my strings. His fingers brushed the case at his feet, and Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind turning to a saint. Mary Mead Carpenter, who had hidden stolen silver in a toolbox. Objects, she knew, could conceal as much as people. You knew Captain Drake as well, she asked, her tone soft, as if inviting a confidence. He and Clara were close to the orchestra during the waltz. Victor's lips tightened, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. I knew him by sight, he said at last. Clara introduced us once, at the village hall. He appreciated music, or so he said. His voice held a trace of disdain, and Miss Marple filed it away, recalling Captain Drake's flask, his unsteady gait. A man who drank, she thought, might not notice the subtleties of a violinist's art, or his secrets. Craddock's eyes narrowed. And the dagger, Mr. Lang? It's an unusual piece, ornate. Ever seen anything like it? Victor's gaze flicked to the table where the dagger had been described, though it remained in the library. No, he said curtly. I don't collect such things. My life is my music. His hand rested on the violin case, protective, almost possessive, and Miss Marple wondered if it held more than an instrument. Craddock closed his notebook, his expression unreadable. Stay at the hall, Mr. Lang. We'll need to speak again if anything comes to mind. Victor nodded, his mask hiding any emotion, and moved toward the door, his violin case in hand. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the weight of the case, the way it swung heavily at his side. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead schoolmaster who carried a locked satchel, later found to hold incriminating letters. What, she wondered, did Victor Lang guard so closely? As the door closed, Craddock turned to her, his voice low. He's a closed book, that one. Did you catch anything I missed? Miss Marple's needles clicked, a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. He speaks little, Inspector, but his silence says much. A man who flinches at a kind word about his music may have more than notes on his mind. She rose, her small frame moving to the window where Victor had stood. The gardens beyond were cloaked in darkness, the moonlight barely touching the hedges. She recalled his solitude in the ballroom, his eyes on Clara, his hand on his case. Music, she knew, could soothe or stir, but it could also hide, a melody to mask a motive. Her mind turned to the other threads of the night. Sir Henry's locked drawer, Captain Drake's flask, Madame Celeste's calloused hands, Lord Reginald's possessive stare. Victor Lang's silence was another piece, a note in a discordant tune. She thought of Clara's missing mask, the dagger's polished handle, and wondered if Victor's violin case held a clue, or a weapon. As they returned to the ballroom, where the guests' whispers had grown sharper, Miss Marple's thoughts wove a pattern, each thread a question. Victor Lang's silence, she knew, was a veil, and she would lift it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 8. The Rival's Motive. The drawing-room of Ashford Hall, with its rosewood panelling and heavy velvet drapes, seemed to tighten its grip on the air, as Miss Jane Marple entered. Her grey muslin gown, a quiet contrast to the room's opulence. The candelabram's light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the portraits of stern Ashford forebears. their eyes seeming to follow the scene below. Inspector Craddock stood by a claw-footed table, his notebook open, his posture alert but weary. Lord Reginald Vance, summoned for questioning, lounged in a high-backed chair, his highwayman's cape thrown back to reveal a tailored suit, his black mask discarded to expose a sharp jaw and a smile that teetered between charm and defiance. His tricorn hat rested on the table, its crimson feather a vivid splash against the polished wood. Miss Marple settled into a cushioned seat, her knitting needles resuming their steady rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the tension in the room. She studied Lord Reginald, noting the way his fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, a restless energy that belied his casual pose. His eyes, a piercing grey, held a glint of something, anger perhaps or wounded pride. She recalled the village whispers of his ardent pursuit of Clara Ashford, his proposals rebuffed, his presence at every social gathering where she appeared. A man scorned, she thought, could be as dangerous as a cornered fox. Craddock's voice cut through the silence, measured but firm. "Lord Reginald, you were seen speaking to Miss Ashford shortly before her death." "What was the nature of your conversation?" Lord Reginald's smile widened, but it was a blade's edge, sharp and cold. "A mere courtesy, Inspector. I wished her well on her engagement. Clara was radiant, as always." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers stilled for a moment. She tilted her head, her voice soft as a whisper of silk. "You danced with her earlier, Lord Reginald. She refused you, I believe, for that waltz. Was she often so elusive?" His eyes flicked to her, a flash of irritation breaking his composure. "Clara was free to choose her partners," he said, his tone clipped. "I respected her choice, though I confess I found her taste misguided." The last word dripped with scorn, and Miss Marple's needles paused, marking the venom in his voice. Craddock leaned forward, his pen poised. "Misguided? You mean Captain Drake? You didn't approve of him?" Lord Reginald's laugh was short, bitter. "Approve? The man's a sailor with a flask and a swagger. Clara deserved better. A title, a future, not some transient hero." His hand clenched, the knuckles whitening, and Miss Marple noted the tremor, like a wire stretched too taut. "You loved her," she said gently, her eyes meeting his. "It must have been painful to see her with another." Lord Reginald's gaze hardened, but he did not look away. "Yes, I loved her," he admitted, his voice low. "I offered her everything, my name, my estate. She refused me time and again for that drunkard." He spat the word, then caught himself, his smile returning like a mask snapped into place. "But murder? Absurd. I'm no barbarian." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Where were you when she was attacked? You were near the dance floor, weren't you?" Lord Reginald shrugged, his cape rustling. "I was in the crowd, yes, watching the spectacle. Madame Celeste's dance, you know. Quite captivating. When the scream came, I was near the terrace doors, I think. It was chaos, masks, movement. I didn't see the act itself." His words were smooth, rehearsed, and Miss Marple's needles clicked, a quiet metronome to her thoughts. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Batchelor, spurned by a grocer's daughter, whose pride had turned to petty cruelties. Lord Reginald's pride, she sensed, was a deeper wound, one that might drive a man to more than words. "The dagger, Lord Reginald," she said, her voice mild. "It's an unusual piece, ornamental. Have you seen such a thing before?" He shook his head, his expression bland. "I collect paintings, Miss Marple, not knives. It's not familiar." But his eyes lingered on the table, as if imagining the blade, and Miss Marple wondered if his denial was as polished as the dagger's handle. Craddock closed his notebook with a snap. "Stay at the hall, Lord Reginald." "We'll need to speak again." Lord Reginald rose, his movements fluid, his smile a challenge. "Of course, Inspector. I've nothing to hide." He swept his cape over his shoulder, retrieved his hat, and strode out, the crimson feather bobbing like a warning. Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "He's got motive, hasn't he?" "Jealousy's a powerful thing," Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "Indeed, Inspector. A man like Lord Reginald wears his pride like armour, but it's brittle. Crack it, and you may find the truth." She rose, her small frame moving to the table where the hat had rested. The feather, she noted, was slightly crushed, as if caught in a hasty movement. Her mind turned to the ballroom, to Lord Reginald's swift departure after his exchange with Clara, his clenched fists as she turned away. She recalled the missing mask, the dagger's clean handle, and wondered if pride could wield a blade as deftly as it wielded words. As they left the drawing-room, the murmur of the waiting guests drifted through the hall, sharp with unease. Miss Marple's thoughts wove a pattern. Sir Henry's locked drawer, Captain Drake's flask, Madame Celeste's calloused hands, Victor Lang's heavy case, and now Lord Reginald's wounded pride. Each was a thread, and the rival's motive, she knew, was a knot she must untie with care. Chapter 9. The Missing Mask. The ballroom of Ashford Hall, once a whirl of music and colour, now stood hushed, its grandeur dimmed by the weight of tragedy. The chandeliers still gleamed, but their light seemed colder, casting stark shadows across the polished oak floor where Clara Ashford had fallen. Miss Jane Marple moved quietly through the deserted space, her grey muslin gown a whisper against the silence, her lace cap tilted as she scanned the room. The guests had been herded to the drawing-room, their murmurs muffled behind closed doors, leaving the ballroom to the police and Miss Marple's keen observation. Inspector Craddock, directing a constable to search the terrace, nodded as she approached, his face etched with the strain of the night. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, noting the scattered remnants of the ball. A dropped fan, a crushed flower, a champagne flute tipped on its side. Her attention settled on a small table near the orchestra's alcove, half hidden by a velvet drape. There, beneath a fold of fabric, she glimpsed a flash of green and gold. Clara's Fairy Queen mask, its ribbons severed as if cut with a blade. She knelt, careful not to disturb it, and examined the mask closely. The ribbons were frayed, the cut uneven, suggesting haste or anger. "Curious," she murmured, her voice soft as the rustle of leaves. Craddock joined her, his notebook open. "You've found it, Miss Marple," said, crouching beside her. "Hidden deliberately, you think?" She nodded, her needles idle in her reticule. "The mask was Clara's shield tonight, Inspector." Someone removed it, perhaps to ensure she was recognized, or to delay discovery of the crime. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Church Bazaar, where a stolen hymn book had been tucked beneath a tablecloth, its thief betrayed by a torn page. Here the mask's concealment spoke of intent, and Miss Marple's mind turned to the moments before Clara's scream. She rose, her small frame moving to the centre of the dance floor, where Clara had collapsed. The spot was unmarked now, the blood cleaned by a diligent servant, But Miss Marple could still see the scene. Clara stumbling, the dagger's ornate handle gleaming, the crowd's chaos. She recalled Lord Reginald's swift retreat after his exchange with Clara, his crimson cape swirling as he vanished into the throng. Had he lingered near this table, masking his actions with the crowd's distraction? Craddock followed her gaze, his voice low. "The dagger was clean, no prints." The mask's ribbons cut. Whoever did this planned it carefully. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. Or acted in haste, Inspector, and covered their tracks. The mask was not far from the orchestra. Victor Lang was there, was he not? She thought of the violinist's heavy case, his silent watchfulness, and wondered if his music had masked more than melody. And Madame Celeste, Craddock added, glancing toward the conservatory doors. Her dance held everyone's eyes. A perfect moment to slip away. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving through the night's threads. Captain Drake's flask, his absence during the scream, Madame Celeste's calloused hands, her glance at Drake, Lord Reginald's wounded pride, his quick departure, Sir Henry's locked drawer, his faltering words. The mask, she sensed, was a key. Its absence, a deliberate stroke in the killer's design. She moved to the terrace doors, now locked, and peered through the glass. The gardens beyond were a maze of shadows, the moonlight barely touching the clipped hedges. Someone may have stepped outside, she said softly. The terrace was close, and the night was dark. Craddock made a note. We'll search the grounds at first light. If the killer discarded anything, ribbons, a glove, it might be there. Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the ballroom, to the crowd's masks and costumes. A dagger could hide in a cape, a case, a sleeve. She recalled Lord Reginald's decorative sword, Madame Celeste's flowing gown, Victor Lang's violin case, even Captain Drake's bulky doublet. And Sir Henry, his study was near the ballroom, its locked drawer a silent question. As they returned to the drawing-room, where the guests' whispers grew sharper with impatience, Miss Marple's mind was a tapestry of clues. The missing mask, now found, was a thread that led somewhere, to a moment, a motive, a hand that struck in the dark. She thought of Clara, her fairy queen's grace undone by a blade, and felt a quiet resolve. Someone always sees, she murmured, echoing her earlier words to Craddock. They just don't know it yet. Chapter 10. The Hidden Letter. The upper corridors of Ashford Hall, with their shadowed oak panelling and faded tapestries, carried a hush that seemed to deepen the night's tragedy. Miss Jane Marple ascended the staircase, her grey muslin gown whispering against the worn steps, her lace cap a pale halo in the dim light of a single wall sconce. Inspector Craddock followed, his footsteps heavier, his face set with the grim purpose of a man chasing truth through a maze of deceit. They had been granted permission by Sir Henry to search Clara Ashford's room, a task Craddock approached with methodical resolve, while Miss Marple's sharp eyes sought the small details that often spoke loudest. Clara's room was a delicate contrast to the hall's grandeur, its walls papered in soft lavender, its windows draped with muslin curtains that stirred faintly in the night breeze. A four-poster bed stood against one wall, its coverlet neatly turned down, as if awaiting an occupant who would never return. A vanity held a silver brush and a scattering of hairpins, and a small writing desk bore a locked diary, its leather cover embossed with Clara's initials. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the diary, her mind recalling a saint. Mary Mead Spinster, whose locked journal had revealed a secret lover. "A young woman's thoughts," she murmured, "are often her truest confidants." Craddock, examining the desk, found a key tucked inside a jewellery box, nestled among pearl earrings and a cameo brooch. He handed it to Miss Marple with a nod. "You do the honours, Miss Marple. You've a way with these things." She smiled faintly, her needles idle in her reticule, and unlocked the diary, opening it to the final entry. The page was dated the day of the ball, the ink still vivid. "Reginald will not let me go. He speaks of love, but it feels like a chain. Lionel knows, but he cannot help. He is lost in his own shadows. I want to be free, but I fear the cost." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her eyes meeting Craddock's. "A romantic triangle, then," she said softly, "with dangerous edges." Craddock read the entry, his brow furrowing. "Lord Reginald again? And Captain Drake, lost in his shadows. What does that mean?" Miss Marple's fingers brushed the page, noting the hurried script, the ink smudged as if written in haste. "Clara was afraid," she said, "not just of Lord Reginald, but of something deeper. Perhaps Captain Drake's drinking, or something she discovered." She thought of the captain's flask, his unsteady gait, and wondered what shadows he carried. Craddock made a note, then turned to search the room further, checking drawers and under pillows. Miss Marple moved to the vanity, her eyes catching a faint scratch on the wood, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. She recalled Sir Henry's study, the locked drawer she had glimpsed, and resolved to return there. "We should speak to Sir Henry again," she said. "He may know more of Clara's fears." They descended to the study, where Sir Henry sat alone, his Venetian doge's robe discarded, his face pale in the lamplight. Craddock showed him the diary entry, and Sir Henry's hands trembled as he read it. "I didn't know," he whispered. "She never told me she was afraid." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "Sir Henry, you mentioned Clara's contentment, but this suggests otherwise. Did she leave any letters, perhaps in your keeping?" He hesitated, his eyes darting to the locked drawer of his desk. With a sigh, he retrieved a key from his waistcoat and opened it, revealing a single letter sealed with Clara's wax. "She gave me this yesterday," he said, his voice breaking. "She asked me to keep it safe, but not to read it unless something happened." Craddock broke the seal, revealing a brief note. "If I am harmed, look to Reginald. His love is a cage and I cannot breathe." The words hung in the air, and Sir Henry buried his face in his hands. "Why didn't I act?" he murmured. "I thought it was just youthful nerves." Miss Marple's needles remained still, her mind weaving the threads. Clara's diary, the hidden letter, Lord Reginald's possessive gaze, Captain Drake's flask, Madame Celeste's calloused hands, Victor Lang's heavy case. The letter was a cry from beyond, and Miss Marple felt the weight of Clara's fear. "You did what you thought best, Sir Henry," she said, her voice kind but firm. "But now we must act." Craddock folded the letter, his expression grim. "This points to Vance. We'll bring him in again." As they left the study, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the ballroom, the missing mask now found, its ribbons cut. The letter confirmed Clara's fear of Lord Reginald, but she wondered if another hand, Drake's, Celeste's, Lang's, had wielded the dagger. The truth, she knew, was close, hidden in the shadows of Ashford Hall, waiting for her to pull the final thread. Chapter 11. The Confrontation. The library of Ashford Hall, its air thick with the scent of old books and dying embers, became a stage for truth. as Miss Jane Marple stood quietly near a towering bookcase, her grey muslin gown blending with the shadows. The room was lit by a single chandelier, its candles guttering, casting a wavering glow over the gathered suspects. Sir Henry Ashford, his face drawn with grief. Captain Lionel Drake, his cavalier's doublet unbuttoned, eyes shadowed. Madame Celeste, her scarlet gown a stark contrast to her guarded expression. Victor Lang, clutching his violin case, his mask discarded to reveal a pallor of unease. And Lord Sir Reginald Vance, his highwayman's cape thrown back, his smile a brittle mask of defiance. Inspector Craddock stood by the mahogany table, where the ornate dagger, now uncovered, gleamed like an accusation. Clara Ashford's body, still draped in velvet on the chaise longue, was a silent witness. Miss Marple's knitting needles were still, tucked in her reticule, her hands folded as she surveyed the room. Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, moved from face to face, reading the flickers of fear, guilt, and defiance as clearly as a saint. Mary Mead Parish Register. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of certainty. Clara Ashford was killed by someone she trusted, she began, her gaze sweeping the group. Someone who hid a weapon in their costume, who cut her mask to obscure the moment of the crime, and who left a trail of secrets we have now uncovered. Sir Henry's hands trembled, his signet ring glinting as he clutched the arm of his chair. Who could do such a thing? He whispered, his voice breaking. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her words were precise. Clara's diary and letter told us of her fear. Fear of a love that became a cage. She turned to Lord Reginald, whose smile faltered, his grey eyes narrowing. You, Lord Reginald, loved her too fiercely. When she chose Captain Drake, your pride turned to rage, did it not? Lord Reginald scoffed, rising from his chair, his cape swirling. This is nonsense, Miss Marple. I loved Clara, yes, but I am no murderer. You've no proof. His voice was sharp, but his hands clenched, betraying a tremor. Miss Marple continued, undeterred. You spoke to her before the scream, a heated exchange. You were seen leaving the dance floor, near the table where her mask was later found, its ribbons cut. You hid it to confuse the timeline, to give yourself moments to slip away. She paused, her gaze steady. But you forgot Clara's diary, and her letter locked in Sir Henry's drawer, naming you as the one she feared. The room tensed, the air heavy with anticipation. Captain Drake's face paled, his hand straying to where his flask had been. Madame Celeste's lips parted, her eyes darting to Lord Reginald. Victor Lang gripped his violin case, his knuckles white. Sir Henry buried his face in his hands, a sob escaping him. Craddock stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. Lord Reginald, did you bring that dagger tonight? Did you strike Clara Ashford? Lord Reginald's laugh was harsh, but it cracked at the edges. I brought no dagger, I danced, I spoke, I left her be. You're chasing shadows, Inspector. Yet his eyes flicked to the door, and Miss Marple noted the bead of sweat on his brow. She tilted her head, her voice gentle but unyielding. The dagger was hidden, perhaps in your cape, its crimson lining perfect for concealment. You knew Clara would refuse you again, and in that moment your pride became a blade. She gestured to the table. The mask, cut and hidden, was your attempt to blur the truth, but Clara's words betray you. Lord Reginald's composure broke, his voice rising. Enough! I loved her, yes, but I didn't. He stopped, his breath ragged, and in the silence his shoulders slumped, a confession in his eyes. "I only wanted her to see reason," he whispered. "She pushed me away, and I lost myself." Craddock signalled to a constable, who stepped forward with handcuffs. "Lord Reginald Vance, you're under arrest for the murder of Clara Ashford." As the cuffs clicked shut, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the others. Captain Drake's relief was palpable, but his eyes held a shadow of guilt. Madame Celeste's face was unreadable, her hands still. Victor Lang's grip on his case loosened, but his silence remained. Sir Henry's grief was raw, his failure to protect Clara etched in his face. Miss Marple thought of St. Mary Mead, where a spurned lover had once hidden poison in a gift. Here, the poison was pride, and the dagger its instrument. As Lord Reginald was led away, his broken whisper echoing, Miss Marple's mind was already tracing the threads that remained. Drake's flask, Celeste's glances, Lang's case, Sir Henry's drawer. The truth was clear, but she knew human nature was never simple, and other secrets might yet linger in Ashford Hall's shadows. Chapter 12. The Quiet Return. The dawn broke over Ashford Hall with a pale, reluctant light, filtering through the heavy drapes of the drawing-room where Miss Jane Marple sat. Her grey muslin gown folded neatly about her, her lace cap slightly askew from the long night. The room was quiet now. The guests dispersed, their costumes shed like so many discarded masks, leaving only the echo of tragedy. Lord Reginald Vance had been taken away, his confession a broken thread in the tapestry of the evening, his pride undone by the weight of Clara Ashford's death. The ornate dagger, the cut mask and Clara's letter had woven a net that trapped him, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on the edges of the pattern, where other shadows flickered. Inspector Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook tucked away, his face weary but relieved. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low with admiration. "I'd have taken longer to pin it on Vance without that diary and letter." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, resuming the pink shawl she had begun days ago in St. Mary Mead. "People reveal themselves, Inspector," she said, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. Lord Reginald's pride was his mask, and Clara's words tore it away. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, whose boasts had hidden theft. Pride, she knew, was a fragile shield. Sir Henry Ashford entered, his face etched with grief, his Venetian doge's robe replaced by a plain suit that hung loosely on his frame. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice hoarse, "I owe you a debt I cannot repay." Clara, she deserved better than my silence. He sank into a chair, his hands twisting the signet ring that had betrayed his unease all night. Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice gentle. "You did what you thought right, Sir Henry." Clara's letter was her voice, and it spoke clearly. She recalled the locked drawer, its secret now revealed, and felt a pang for the man who had failed to protect his niece. Craddock glanced at her. "What of the others, Miss Marple?" "Drake, Celeste, Lang, any loose ends?" She smiled faintly, her mind sifting through the night's threads. Captain Drake's flask, hinting at a weakness Clara had feared. Madame Celeste's calloused hands, suggesting a past beyond the stage. Victor Lang's heavy violin case, a mystery unresolved. "They each carry their own burdens," she said, but the dagger was Lord Reginald's, and his motive was clear. "The rest, they will answer to their consciences." Sir Henry rose, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Stay for breakfast, both of you. It's the least I can do." Miss Marple shook her head, her shawl nearly complete. "Thank you, Sir Henry. But I must return to St. Mary Mead. My garden needs tending, and there's a certain peace in familiar things. As she left Ashford Hall, the morning air cool against her face, she thought of Clara, her fairy queen's gown stained with betrayal. The carriage rolled toward the village, and Miss Marple settled back, her needles clicking, the pink shawl a soft weight in her lap. The costume ball had unmasked more than faces, jealousy, fear, pride, and she felt the quiet satisfaction of seeing truth emerge from shadow. Back in her cottage, she sipped tea by the fire, the shawl now folded neatly on a chair. The roses outside nodded in the breeze, and Miss Marple's eyes rested on them, her mind already turning to the next puzzle human nature might offer. For in St. Mary Mead, as in Ashford Hall, secrets bloomed like weeds, and she was ever ready to tend the garden.